We've been sort of looking at this question of what is this world in which we believe in God, and how do we react to that? How do we respond? How do we live it out, the faith that we have? The question I want to ask this morning, and it follows on from things we've been talking about, particularly the last couple of weeks, I think, looking at with spirituality in the world and in the church, is what can we learn from urban monasticism? And I'll just say this now, I'll come back to it, but a couple of weeks back, we were at a conference of the mission that Belinda and I are part of, have been for decades now. And we have very good friends, American friends in Paris, you'll see a picture of them later, and they have developed this thing called urban monasticism. It's one of the things they're doing. We'll have a look at why. So that's why it was on my mind, and I mentioned it last week, that in many ways, it feels like we're very much like a monastic community, and I'll try and explain why. We are not a monastic community, but we can learn something from this, I think. So that's where we are. But I want to start with a passage that Rosanna talked about last week. This passage from Jeremiah, God saying to Israel through Jeremiah the prophet, the Old Testament prophet, "My people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and have dug out cisterns for themselves, broken cisterns that can hold no water." Now, what context do we use the word cistern these days? Yeah, a broken cistern is a broken toilet. Okay, that's probably about I don't know, maybe other people have other uses for it. It's not an English word we use outside this context, so it may bring some rather odd connotations to mind when you read Jeremiah. And he's not talking about their broken toilets, right? Clearly. What is he talking about? Well, he's talking about something like this. It's the first temple era of Israel. So the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians at the beginning of the 6th century BC. So this is very old. These cisterns were big caverns dug out in the rock and filled with water. It was a city. They needed a reliable, regular water supply. So it was a big tank cut out of the rock, plastered. If you look closer, you can sort of see signs of where the plastering has come away. And it sustained the life of a city. It was a shared facility, a utility for the city. This one is about 4-5 meters across, high, 12 meters in length. So it was a fairly major piece of engineering to build it. Living waters, you've forsaken me, the living water, a source of living water, and you have built your own cisterns in the city, but they're broken. They don't hold water. Now, it used to be thought, in fact, that the ancient Jerusalem got its water only from the Gihon spring in the Kidron Valley. So it wasn't flowing all the time, but much of the time there was the Kidron spring, and archaeologists had not found any other way in which they could keep water in the city until 2012, when they discovered this cistern. It's the only one they found so far. They think there must be very likely others. What Jeremiah is saying to the people of Jerusalem is that they have abandoned the natural flowing water from the spring, from the stream, the Gihon stream in the Kidron Valley, the life that comes directly from God, and instead they have sought to rely on other resources to sustain life. And in this case, what he's talking about is alliances with more powerful nations, because he goes on to say, "And now what do you gain by going to Egypt to drink the waters of the Nile?" You have a fount, a spring of living water in Jerusalem, the life of God, and yet you go off to Egypt looking for help to drink the waters of the Nile. Or what do you gain by going to Assyria to drink the waters of the Euphrates? You can see how he's developing the metaphor. And Rosanna made the point last week, we have our own broken systems, the various resources that we develop for ourselves because we don't want to rely on that spring of living water. It might be rationalism, it might be materialism, it might be humanism, it might be, the spiritualities of the world in one way or another. I mean, it's sort of uncomfortable using the word spirituality with reference to the life of the church. But anyway, so the question for us is, how do we sustain the authentic spiritual life in the fullest sense as a community, the spiritual life of the community in an urban environment? So not just a matter of how do I sustain my personal spiritual life. The cisterns were built. The spring was there for a whole city. It's a community, it's a nation, it's a people, it's a society that this is talking about. Now, urban environment, we're going to talk about urban monasticism, but we're going to start in the wilderness for a number of reasons. This is the hills over the Dead Sea, looking over the Dead Sea, are Qumran. At the time of Jesus, there was a community out in the desert of super strict Jewish adherence to the law of Moses. They left Jerusalem because they could not maintain purity in a city occupied by a Gentile power. So actually for the last couple of 100 years, they'd been out in the wilderness. There was a monastic community out there. The idea was this is how you preserve holiness, law-based holiness, Torah-based holiness, the only way they could do it. Get out of the unclean city. And they kept it going for about 300 years, but when the Romans finally invaded, it was finished. But they left behind in these caves in the hills their library. And it was discovered, it was in the mid-20th century, by Bedouin shepherds, and that's the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it's an invaluable source for students of the period, students of the Bible, students of the New Testament. It's a community out in the wilderness. We don't hear about it in the Bible, except that who can you think? A voice in the wilderness. John the Baptist. Charlotte mentioned this passage last week. The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. This is the beginning of Mark's gospel. As it is written in Isaiah the prophet, "Behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare the way." The voice of one crying in the wilderness. Remember, Charlotte was talking about how beautiful are the feet of that strange little bird sort of paddling across the lilies, the jacaranda, I think it was. A voice of one crying in the wilderness, "Prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight." John appeared baptizing in the wilderness and proclaiming a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. Sometimes there's a need to go out into the wilderness to get a sense of direction, to get a sense of what God is saying, to get a sense of that call to repent and to hear the proclamation of good news. The messenger is sent before your face, "Prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight." That's a message beginning in the wilderness. And when we think of monasteries, it may well be that you think of somewhere out in a remote place. Monks or nuns, less commonly nuns, who've removed themselves from the corrupt society around them and gone out into the wilderness. And this is a very good example. It's St. Catherine's Monastery in Sinai. Belinda and I went there. We were in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, 2002 for COP27, the climate change conference. And at the end, we sort of went out to see the monastery. And lots of people do. It's much more crowded and busy and a big major sort of tourist magnet. But it's a stunning, you can see it's a stunning location. It's not very far from Mount Sinai. You can see it if you stand in the right place. World's oldest continually inhabited Christian monastery. It dates back to the 6th century, and I think there was something there even before that. It has the chapel of the burning bush, and here is the burning bush, Moses' burning bush, supposedly. that has survived 3,000 years out here. But it also had, and this is of interest to me as a biblical scholar, the Codex Sinaiticus was found in the 19th century by a German Count von Tischendorf. I discovered it there, took it back and never returned it. It's like you go to the library, you take your book out and you don't return it. The Tsar of Russia wouldn't let him give it back. It's most of the Greek Bible, the Greek Old Testament and the Greek New Testament, and large parts of it are in the British Library. If you want to go and see it, you can go and see it there. This is the beginning, and I'm getting a little obscure here, but I love this. This is the beginning of Mark's Gospel, the passage we've just read in Greek. The beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Now look, we shouldn't do this, but there's 4 letters there. Can you see? That's Jesus Christ. It's in Greek, it's the first and last letter of each word. Jesu Christou, the first letter of Jesu, and the last letter, first letter, and the last letter. The little lines over the top show that it's an abbreviation. Okay? Jesus Christ is a way of abbreviating. The Son of God is there. So some manuscripts don't include it. It's been written in between the lines in very small writing in the same way. Huiu, Theou. First letter, last letter, first letter, last letter. And the point is, and I'll make the point in a moment, I just think that's fascinating. What are monasteries for then? They preserve the life of the people of God in troubled, difficult, challenging times. You go out into the wilderness to preserve something that can't be preserved easily in the cities. St. Catherine's, as I said, was built in the 6th century, oldest continuously inhabited Christian monastery. Monasteries transmit the word and the wisdom of God from one generation to the next. And here, quite literally, transmitting the word of God, copying the text very carefully, as precisely as they could. The scribes, hundreds and hundreds of scribes, copying the scriptures in Hebrew and Greek so that the next generation would have them. And they are places of work and prayer, of practical and spiritual discipline. So that sort of gives you an idea of where, this whole monastic idea comes from, monastic thing comes from. But let's just sort of stay in the wilderness, in the Sinai Peninsula for a little while. This is from Exodus 19. On the 3rd new moon after the people of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, so about 3 months, roughly, 2 to 3 months after they come out of the land of Egypt, remember Moses is sent to them, bring the people out of the land of Egypt. This is the Exodus. They came into the wilderness of Sinai, and they encamped in the wilderness. And the Lord said to Moses out of the mountain, called to Moses out of the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the people of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant," that's critical, a call to obedience, "you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel." So this idea, what Israel would be, is a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a kingdom, a whole people who are a priesthood, not a select group, not an elite, not a special caste, but a whole society is that priestly society in the midst of all the other nations. Now, when we get to Revelation, and we've touched on this, Andy, thank you, it's brilliant. And that, yes, there is joy in the book of Revelation. This is that scene in heaven, in Revelation chapter 5, the throne room of God. You've got all the living creatures, 4 living creatures, and the 24 elders, and the Lamb in the midst of them, the Lamb that was slain, and John in his sort of extraordinary, poetic, apocalyptic fashion describes this. And between the throne and the four living creatures and among the elders, I saw a lamb standing as though it had been slain. You don't stand as though you've been slain. And they sang a new song, saying, worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God. You brought people out of a different slavery, a different place. From every tribe and language and people and nation of you have made for them a kingdom of priests to our God, and they shall reign on the earth. Now, people read Revelation in all sorts of different ways. I think this is us reigning on the earth, and maybe that's probably not the term we would use. But I think this priestly idea continues in the church. But it's no longer one ethnic group. It's no longer one nation. It's a people drawn from every tribe, every language, every people, every nation. And that is pretty much who we are. All from your different tribes in obscure, remote, distant parts of the world. It's brilliant. Brilliant. So we are a priestly people, right? That's a sort of little cartoon figure, a Jewish priest, just to sort of illustrate the point. It was true then, it's true for us now. That a priest mediates between God and the people. She stands between God and the people. The community of priests stands between God and the people, mediating in both directions. You represent God to the world, and you represent the world to God. That's the task of the church. That's what the church is here for, essentially. It would be my way of understanding things. Now, let's just sort of go back and think about what happens in the New Testament. We've got a number of places on the map. That's a map of the Mediterranean world, just in case it's not clear. Sinai right down in the bottom right-hand corner. Okay, so this is sort of where the whole story began for us. Jerusalem, Ephesus, these are parts of Paul's world, the places in Paul's world. Corinth, Illyricum. We know where Illyricum is now, don't we? If you were here last week and paying attention. Huh? Who was here last week from, the missionaries here last week from Albania, and Rosie said, Albania, it's Illyricum. It's new, that's where, I don't know, it doesn't matter. Rome and Spain. And then so we have Paul comes in, the Apostle Paul, his mission, in effect, and it's a complicated and long story, but his mission takes him from Jerusalem all the way across this world. We don't know that he gets to Spain. We don't know that happens. But he certainly intended to go as far as Spain. He writes to the church in Rome, I'm coming to visit you, and my desire is to go on to Spain after that. He is proclaiming the good news about the Lord Jesus Christ to the whole of this world. And the effect is, it's sooner or later, it took sort of 200 or 300 years, but in terms of what happened in history, we end up with the Christian West, Christian Europe. Yeah? And the church has become that priesthood. The churches of the Christian West are priestly communities mediating between God and everyone around them. That's sort of how I would understand it. That was their role. They didn't do a very good job of it all the time. Sometimes they did an outstanding job of it. Okay? The point is now, the world has changed. Our world has changed. We used to be a Christian society here, which is why we have this building, right? We are now a post-Christian society. So let's just think about what has happened to this priestly people in the process. Because we used to have parish churches that would simply serve the local community. You lived in that parish, you went to that church. And that was true if you're an Anglican or a Catholic or a Methodist or a Baptist or whatever. And that's how this church would have been back in the 19th century. And the church is supported by society. But the people go because it's expected of them socially. The money comes from the Christian society, in effect. That's how they're sustained in this pre-modern world. We, in a modern world, Consumer church is not a nice way of putting it, but there is a sense in which if once a church is no longer being sustained by the government or by the state or by the society, you have to find other ways of sustaining it. And you rely on attracting a large enough number of people coming from all over. You could call it a commuter church. People, and they're not necessarily from the area. They go to the church they want, they consume the religious service, and they pay for them. That's being a little cynical, I admit, but it's how the church has to sustain itself. I think what we represent here in Westbourne Grove is something beyond that. And I don't want to be negative about the other churches. And in many ways, this is not a clear distinction. We're all these things in all sorts of ways. We're part of this. But in a postmodern world, what seems to be happening, or one of the things that's happening, is that you're seeing church become missional. That term gets used a lot. Or, as we've been talking about today, you become a monastic community. Now, I'm just going to try and explain what I mean by that. But the point is, the basic point is, how do you sustain it? How is it sustainable? If we're no longer sustained by society, if we're not simply attracting large enough number of people to pay for the service, to put it bluntly, what sustains it? Now, Dave Hollow was here a couple of weeks back from Community Church Harlesman, a sister church, a church that we have a close relationship with. And he was talking about how that church has grown. And they're a group of young people who moved into Harlesden and sort of determined to live in the same area together, shared housing and so on. They've done it over 15, 20 years now. And he talked about sort of 4 principles that have guided them, proactively grounded in specific time and space. In other words, proactively just means that, they're thinking about it. This is intentional. It's not accidental. They are doing this in a very conscious way, deliberate way. Centrally focused on the renewal of all things, pushing the logic of what it means to be a body, which is a fun way of putting it. And then finally, knowing our formation matters more than our achievements. So they're putting themselves there as a learning community that prioritizes the sense of being a community over simple numbers, centrally focused on the renewal of all things. That points them to what God is doing. It's not about the renewal of my life, which is good, important, and necessary. It's the renewal of all things. It takes into account a God who is doing far more than simply reconciling you as an individual person to himself. Doesn't happen apart from that, but there's a lot more going on. And they're doing it in a specific time and place. They're very conscious of where they are and when they are. That is a missional community. It's not quite a monastic community because they don't really have a monastery. I think they're probably still more missional than monastic, if you see what I mean. Another example is another sister church in London here, Christ Community Church. This is from their website. At its core, Christ Community Church is about permeating our environments where we live, work, and do life with the person and love of Jesus Christ through our own personal stories of transformation, lived out in community. The strategy of planting churches in our native communities and environments is key to the success of the vision. Community and context, community and environment. They're thinking about the place of a community in a particular place at a particular time. Very simple. I don't know if they intended this, but those 2 words, environment, community, really get the point. So they are dividing themselves up. They're a fairly large group. They're breaking themselves up into smaller groups. This is the plan. They're proactively putting themselves in particular places to meet as community. They're being missional. So let me sort of keep moving this forward. What is urban monasticism? Because I think we have a slightly different place in this story, but simply because we have this building. I think that gives us a reason to take the whole urban monastic idea very seriously. What is urban monasticism? And our friends Paul and Jordan don't own this idea. They didn't invent it. They're simply developing sort of set of resources and materials and network of people to live it out. So this is Paul and Jordan. They're American. They've been living in Paris for probably 10 years. Come, let's walk together, they say, the beginning of the book. Being a monastic is not a destination. There's the book, while we're at it. It is a journey with Christ into a greater understanding and embodiment of your faith. This way of life invites you to engage deeply with God, yourself, and your world. Being a monastic is an intentional, embodied, and fulfilling way to be a Christian. Discover how to live monastically in your city. So in that urban context, and again, it's this how do you live the life of God in that urban context? And I highlighted that little bit in the middle there, engage deeply with God, yourself, and your world. There's something missing there. Engage with community of the church. And this is one of the things, that the way they develop this, it's for a dispersed community. Individuals living in cities, what I want us to think about is, what does this mean for a community in an urban environment? A community that's much bigger than just one, more than the sum of the parts, put it that way. But I love what they're doing. The rhythms of the city, they talk about this, and rhythm is very much an idea associated with monastic life. We live this urban monastic way of life within our cities. Where we live informs our lives, our practices, and our rhythms. Every rhythm we have in our lives takes more than time. Every rhythm is something that we do. The things we do are given shape by where we do them. It's not just the sort of, church is the same thing wherever you put it. No, it's a community that has to fit where we are, has to make sense in this context. Our monastic practices and rhythms are shaped by where we live and work. Living in the city is not a statement of values or superiority. For the first time, city living is now the reality for over half of humanity. Urban monasticism makes a monastic life accessible to anyone who loves Jesus and lives in the city. It's a simple idea. And then the book goes on to develop a whole number of practices that people learn to follow in order to have that monastic discipline to their spiritual life, which we're not going to talk about today. So we need to sort of move this from the monastic life of individuals as dispersed individuals in a city, living, working, meeting their neighbours, doing all the things that they do, to thinking about this as a gathered community, because this building matters, I think. And I met with Chris and Charlotte, for those who don't know, were the pastor and his wife for 30 odd years. And this whole redevelopment of the building was their vision, and so on 20, 25 years ago. And we talked about this whole thing, because I didn't realize how much a monastic idea shaped the design of the building. That whole rethinking of the use of this edifice, this great old Baptist church, very much at the heart of it was this urban monastic ideal. So these are from a couple of paragraphs from the architectural notes, the notes that they gave to the architect to say, this is what we imagine, this is what we're thinking of. The interior has not been, no, I think actually this is writing afterwards, but anyway, it doesn't matter. The interior has not been simply modified and restored, so that it could still look like it did, just sort of put the walls back together and everything else. It doesn't look anything like the original church on the inside. One key design theme guiding the process has been modern monastic. On the one hand, the aim has been to create a church that is unashamedly relevant to the world we now live in by the use of contemporary materials and shapes well-proportioned spaces and high-specification infrastructure. Equally, the church represents eternal truths, unchanging values, and is rooted in history, time and space. The design to convey this by, the aim of the design is to convey this by an emphasis on simplicity, solidity, and weight, the use of traditional high-quality materials and handcrafted furniture. The church sees itself as a community of faith, and the design of the building facilitates the expression of community life. The second paragraph. At present, Christianity is not a powerful force in our culture. The majority do not attend church, and most people have very little or no understanding of Christianity. Church design needs to address this by becoming more evangelistic. The whole design of the space, and evangelistic in the sense that you're putting a message across in all sorts of ways, not simply by getting on a bus and talking to someone about Jesus. That's evangelism, but it's not all there is to it if you have a space like this. Church design needs to address this by becoming more, I've said that. That is to say, focused more on people outside the church with the intention of engaging them and inviting them into a dialogue of spiritual discovery of the Christian faith. This has been a long-standing vision of the congregation, and the redevelopment of the church building has given a unique opportunity of expressing those principles architecturally. So just to sum up, and these were the notes that I made, it goes over the same ground to a degree, in talking to Chris about this earlier in the week, just to sum up, I mean, this would be my glimpse of God, because I had no idea that this modern monasticism, urban monasticism, had so much, was fed the rethinking of the church. So the architect was given a modern or an urban monastic brief, we could say. The aim, though, was to reproduce traditional monastic functions. Things like hospitality, refuge, providing refuge, learning, healing, work, a place of work, legal processes. The scribes in the monasteries, there weren't many educated people around. If you had a legal issue, you went to the monastery to get help. Just the same way that many dozens of people you would go to Chris to get help with their dealings with the council, or whatever it was. Care for the poor, prayer, obviously. Rhythms of life and worship. And rhythms of life and worship. Sunday is a rhythm of life and worship for us. Breaking bread is a rhythm of life and worship. We do it weekly, and so on. So the design ideas, again, simplicity, solidity, permanence, transparency, a building that can be used for different purposes. So part of the thinking here is it's not exclusively our space. It provides a passageway, a bridge between two worlds of space, by the way it's used, by the way it's been thought through, the way it's been designed. And I can hear Charlotte here, avoiding the conventions and cliches of much modern and secular design and furniture. Whether that always works, I don't know, but that was part of the thinking behind it. The lobby was thought through as a place for encounter, for interaction, for conversation, for inquiry. And then there's something about that wall there, which I think, the thinking behind the white wall in the lobby that comes all the way down here is it creates a journey towards sacred space. You come in the door there, you come through this very neutral lobby space where all sorts of interactions can go on, but you're moving down here towards the table and the sacred scaffolding in the corner, which is not always there. It was there, that was very much part of what they were thinking. It may not be noticed most of the time, but I think it's good to be aware of this. Mission, that was a big part. Proclamation, explanation, experience, puzzle, demonstration. Puzzle? I mean, these are Chris's words, not mine. What was what he was thinking of was the way Jesus somewhat bewildered people with telling these parables. And they didn't understand it. So Chris had this thought that something in who we are, what we do, what the building looks like, is a puzzle that provokes thought, provokes inquiry, provokes a certain humility in a person. And I'm not entirely, we might sort of get him to talk about this sometime and find out a bit more about what he meant. But he's absolutely right about Jesus. Jesus told some very puzzling stories that the disciples struggled with, let alone the rest of the Jews. And then consultative leadership, how well we do. We're small enough community we have leadership, we have designated leaders, people like me as an elder, and Jose and Rosanna here, and others who have a sort of very clear leadership role in the church. But that principle of consultative leadership strikes me as worth holding to. That we, as long as we can, that we share this leadership together. We are a community of leaders. No, it's not just me, it's not just these guys at the front. In some sense, it's the responsibility of all of us, and the joy of all of us. And finally, sustainability. Now, this kind of obvious in some ways, the building pays for itself. The lettings, the income we have. The vision was not just to create a nice space for a church, it's to create a place that generates income. It has an economic function in the same way that the old monasteries still do to a degree, much less so than they used to. So it's a place of prayer, but it's also a place of work. Paul and Jordan make much of this. It's a major sort of theme of their thinking. It's both a sacred space and it's an economic space. So I'll just read, a monastic has two vocations, to pray and to work. Prayer is the first and most important vocation of a monastic life. Our lives, seasons and days are structured around prayer. There are many ways to pray, and we aspire to pray in and through all things. Prayer comes first. And I'm sort of using that prayer in a very big sense, in as much as everything we do as a worshipping community comes under the label of prayer. Even if we should be doing it a lot more regularly and consistently and deliberately. But our second vocation is our work. I mean, the work that we all have, in any context, at home, in a place of work or wherever it is, monastics have worked with their minds and bodies ever since the earliest days in the Egyptian desert. They show us that one can be so transformed by prayer that to work is to pray. That's important. The two go together. They're not separate, completely separate functions. Urban monasticism invites us to give special attention to the work we commit ourselves to. Our work has a large impact on our lives, how we live, and where we live. It's inseparable. This is also a place of work, which is sort of dimension that they don't really sort of bring into it because they're thinking of individuals, but it is part of who we are. So we have these two spheres, these two aspects of what we're doing. We are a praying, worshipping community at the heart of this whole thing. We worship, we teach, we break bread together. Perhaps we should be fasting a little more often. We observe the Sabbath. This is we don't think twice about it now, but it's a key rhythm of the spiritual life, the prayer life of the community. And we share meals together, and just a reminder that we'll have lunch together after this service. And then on the other side, you've got the work part, everything that goes on in the reception. And they do a brilliant job in engaging with people all through the week. Events and lettings, building management, advocacy and support. And if there are ways that we can do something of that advocacy work that Chris did, that would be brilliant. If we can't, well, we'll think about it at a later stage. And the art space, the times we've been able to put on art shows here, including quite recently with the young Korean crowd with their work. That sort of perhaps belongs over there. So you've got, in effect, a sacred space and a secular space, but here's the critical thing. We have to merge them. You can't do it completely, perhaps. So in everything we do, so Leah's back from holiday, is sort of running the operations side of it. That is as spiritual and as sacred as what I do, or Rosanna and Jose, or Andy does leading the worship. That's part, that should be as much a sacred activity. And at the same time, what we do as a worshipping community breathes this water, this life of God into the economic life of the church, the business side of the church. You see what I mean? They should work together. Let's not let them become separate things in our thinking.